Dr. Sykes, I saw that you had Tara to your class today.
Yes.
She was our case manager for the
Isn't she the best?
She was amazing, and she's been kind of a resource over the summer, and she's just
That's
like a
so
lovely
great.
person.
Yeah, she really is. Are you free? Do you want to come to the class?
I have a meeting, but I would have asked, because I really would love to see her.
We'll record it, so remind me, send me an email.
So
She really is fantastic.
I'll start up the Zoom, and then maybe you can make the.
Oh, I started it on this computer.
You start on this computer?
Yeah.
Are you you're the host of it? Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
So maybe, I don't know if you can make me co-host.
I think I can. I don't think you necessarily need to be. Because I think you can,
I guess that's probably true.
I think you can like share if you wanted to.
Good, how are you? Where's the link for this? You're not teaching much this year. Here, how can I find a link for? Just.
It's on the
Journal,
the homepage on the calendar.
Okay.
the journal too, right?
Hi, Ellie.
Yes.
Hello, how are you?
Good. How you doing?
Good.
Awesome. Hello.
Oh, great.
Oh, that's on that.
It's on this page too. Let's move forward.
Oh, that's you. Okay, I made you co-host. So I guess you can do things like mute people and stuff. I think if you're co-host, you can probably mute people if you need to. and stuff like that.
Sure, yeah. Did you make this call?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll meet everybody. So when I introduce, is there anything specific you would want to mention?
I don't think so. We're gonna do introductions.
Okay.
By way of keypads. I was really excited to do it. This is who we are.
Perfect.
We have keypads, except me. I used to have keypads.
You start.
So, yeah, you can.
How many people are online?
It's just my co-presenters. Marina should be coming in. So she's on the way, but
Of course, surprise. Okay, well, I won't say anything then about questions online. Last time we had a few questions, but I want to make sure.
and we are happy to have like it's sort of more conversation.
Okay.
So,
Okay, sure. Sure, that's perfect. Awesome.
I got.
So you're like, why are you here?
You have to go to the institutions or can you go other places?
Sorry.
It's all right, we haven't started yet.
Hi, Jose. Well, parking still sucks.
It sucks worse.
Hello.
It's like worse.
Hi, Professor Dia.
It's nice to see everyone. I have books and bookings.
Oh, yeah.
It's acceptance. Blair is kind of, and I think,
Yeah.
and he's disappeared. So I just gotta wait a second. for him.
That's okay.
Let's start out. Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to the second installment of the Thompson Rivers University Faculty of Law Research Series. We're so excited to have you all here. And I'm really excited to introduce our second talk, which is sort of a conglomeration of a all-star research team led by your very own Professor Katie Sykes. And it's on, as you can see, and you saw in the advertisements, it's about the Civil Resolutions Tribunal, which is a cutting edge form of dispute resolution in British Columbia. And so Katie and her team of RAs have done some really exciting research over the last couple of years into how the tribunal is doing and the work it's doing and the experience of people who are involved in pleadings before the tribunal. And so they're going to talk us through, I'm not exactly sure what, but it'll be about the research they've been doing. They'll probably share some with the process and their experience going through it. When I asked Katie if there's anything I should share when I introduced the talk, she said, no, except that she hopes that the presentation will be a bit more conversational. They prepared their talk to be like that rather than more formal. So you don't need to wait until the end if you have questions. If there is anything you want to sort of interact with as they're talking, she said they'd love to have you talk with them as they're going through their presentation materials. So if you haven't already, we have a lot of cookies and muffins. I'm sorry we can't send them through Zoom to those people who are attending that way, but help yourselves. And as we have a relaxed atmosphere, if you want to get up and get something, please feel free to do that as well. And so I will turn things over to Katie and to her team. Thank you so much.
Do you guys want a minute to grab a cookie or something? I don't want them to go away. It seems like really wrong that there's starving students over here and muffins over here. All right, well, if you want to jump up and get them, then you can. So as Blair said, we want this to be kind of in the nature of a conversation. I'm really lucky to be here with Marina Landry, who is here in person, yay, and is an alumni, and two of my fellow researchers on this project, Ali Kumar and Becca Dixon, who both also are alumni. And we had two other people working on this with us, Sarah Hewitt and Candace Folks, who unfortunately couldn't join us. But it was we've had a really good experience working together on this project. And it was sort of like a new set of skills, I think, for all of us, including me. I had not really done serious empirical legal research before, so we kind of had a bit of an adventure together. And we want to sort of tell you a little bit about what we researched and what our findings were, but we also want to tell you a bit about kind of what that was like, and we hope you'll jump in with questions. So the Civil Resolution Tribunal, how many of you are second years here? Okay, so you guys did the exercise where you kind of lived the experience of being a participant in the Civil Resolution Tribunal. Other people, how many have heard of the Civil Resolution Tribunal? Okay, so often people haven't, and it's even more so when we started doing this project. I think more people have heard of it now because of its expansion into motor vehicle accident jurisdiction, but we started this in earnest in 2019, and it was not super well known. And we would sort of talk to people about what we were doing, and they'd be like, "No, what?" So I'm glad that everyone has at least some familiarity with it. And how this story began was I got interested in this because I don't even know how I first heard about it, but I somehow through, organic connections with people, I got to know some of the people involved, including Darren Thompson, who I think many of you will have heard speak and stuff, and kind of learned that this thing existed. And I was like, that's kind of amazing. It is often referred to as an online court. And as you know, if you sort of were like playing the part of a litigant in it, it is a lot like a court, but online. Technically, it's an administrative tribunal. And it was set up to provide a way to resolve disputes in the public system using remote technology. The other way that it's not really an online court is it doesn't have to be online. You can do it by phone. You can, there exists a mechanism for there to be in-person hearings, but I don't think it's ever been used. I'm not sure if it's ever been used. But it's designed to be accessible, to work around the needs of the users, and not to require users to work around the set schedule of a court and its place in a building in a certain location. And it's also designed to have all of these aspects of the process that sort of enable people to get through it on their own if they need to. And this is responding to the fact that, more and more courts, the litigation system is lawyerless because people can't afford lawyers. So there are tons of self-represented or pro se litigants in the system trying to get through a system that was not built contemplating that they might exist. And the CRT was built like responding to that. So I thought that that was really interesting. I was aware of, the kind of gap between the legal profession and the legal system and sort of the needs of the public that aren't being met. And also was interested in how sort of technological innovation has the potential to meet some of those needs. And I was excited by the existence of this thing in our system that was kind of like turning all those ideas into reality. And I thought, well, I'll apply for a SHRC grant, which is a big government granting agency, and kind of make up a study that I could do. Don't tell anyone this, that will probably sound sort of convincing, and see if they'll give me a grant to do the study. And I didn't think they would. It was my first time applying for a SHRC grant, and the received wisdom is you usually have to get one on the second try. So I'm like, okay, this is my sort of like rehearsal. And oops, they did. So I was like, now I have to do this research. And so I needed help. I needed people to help me do the research. And there were a number of different things I wanted to do, but the main one was to sort of see, like, is this helping people with access to justice? Because that's sort of the purpose. And so the main kind of empirical piece was go ask people and find out, and ask them a bunch of questions and try to get some more understanding of that. So I got my dream team together, and this is the part where we'll introduce ourselves using cute animals. So I'll start with Marina.
Well, these are my legal assistants. This is Penny and this is Charlie. Charlie hasn't helped much because I just got her.
She's still learning her legal research skills.
She's still learning. She mostly works out of my lap, so that works. But my name is Marina Landry. I graduated here in 2020, and Katie has taught me property law in my first year. And then over the years, we just got closer and we started hanging out outside of school. And that's how I got introduced to the project. She's like, hey, I got this cool idea, and I was on board right away because I think it's a great way to learn and of how the law is evolving. And then she got the rest of the team together.
Yeah, so I'll let the rest of the team introduce themselves using cute animals, and then I'll introduce my cute animals who aren't with us anymore. Becca, you want to go first?
Yeah, I can go. I have to go grab my cute animal though, so I'll be right back.
She has an extra cute. Well, they're all extra cute.
Yeah, take it easy now.
Yeah, it's not a competition.
Oh, this is my puppy Piper. She's a product of online law school, and the advantages that come with that of being able to have a puppy at home. So she's almost 1 year old. So I had to struggle through the first few years of the project by myself without her assistance. But I, like Marina, took property law with Katie and then was looking for a summer position and chatted with her about what research opportunities she might have coming up. She was like, well, I do have this thing, and it would be really good if I could hire someone that had like empirical research, math, science background. And I was like, that's me. I did an undergrad in science. I have done math before. So that was my great into the project. So I was hired summer of 2019, I guess.
That's right, yeah.
Oh, wow. Did you want to see my video with my puppy larger now or what? So yeah, I've been working on it since my first year of law school, and it has been a great learning experience. And I am very grateful for Katie's assistance.
And Allie, do you have any cats handy by any chance?
Yeah, they're just behind me. I'll grab them. So Milo is currently sleeping in a shoebox. So here he is. And Nita just left. She's eating, but I'll grab her.
She's a baby. She's very cute.
So this is Nita. She is the newest addition, and she is currently 6 months old. So she's been a great help over the summer. I was a later addition to the team, so I kind of came on board after they had done the research in the first paper, which is what we're going to be talking a lot about today. But I took expert legal systems design with Katie in my third year. And so I missed out on the whole property situation in first year, but I got to join the team later, which was nice because I got to spend more time with Becca and Sarah, who hadn't been in my first year section, so hadn't really spent a lot of time with them, and got to learn more about the CRT. So it was great.
Thanks. And then my cute animals are my boy Charlie and Brando, and they sadly have gone to Park Heaven. But we have the animals partly just to make you like us, but also because, you know, we really did work together as a team, and all of our family members were like important parts of like making it a fun experience.
Yeah.
And
My kids never made the slides, but they were they weren't nearly as helpful as the dogs.
they came to like dinner. From
They were
time to time, right?
semi-supportive, yeah.
They had a role.
They came to eat.
So we started out in 2019. And at that point, you know, I had done my proposal. And so I had like a rough sketch of what to do, but no real idea what to do. And I got my team of amazing research assistants together, and we all started referring to ourselves as the dream team because it was just really fun to work together. And we had a sort of like little training session, I think in this very room in like May of that year. And then we got to work trying to gather up the information that we needed for our study. And the rough overview of it is that I put a slide in just to have an excuse to put this animation in because it's really cool. And also that we sort of had two prongs. One was getting survey data from people who had used the CRT, and we created this pretty long survey. Marina actually did most of that. And I don't know, your kids were supportive for that one? No, okay, maybe not.
Penny was.
Penny was, all right. And then we found people to answer the survey, which was a whole thing. And then the other prong of it was that we did a bunch of long form interviews with not users of the system, but people who had some reason that we wanted to know their opinion about it because they was a part of the legal system in some way, including a bunch of people from the CRT who could sort of talk to us about the inside perspective. And then some lawyers, some kind of people involved in access to justice, and sort of frontline advocates for people who need access to justice. Even we had like a couple of academics, and did we do any journalists in the end? I think we tried to.
We reached out, but it was a bit of short notice to be.
Yeah, and it's
Yeah.
and they kind of responded like, we don't really know anymore.
And we
what
don't
need
really-
to do.
yeah,
So,
yeah, they
so that
didn't
was an
care.
idea we pursued at one point. But we sort of got these long form interviews with lots of like people's reaction from kind of the legal culture to this new creature. And that we're still working on analyzing that. So we will start, as Ali said, we're going to mostly talk about the survey data. So we'll start with, we're going to talk a little bit about what the CRT is, although we know that you guys are sort of an educated audience, so we don't spend too long on it. Do you want to take the lead on this?
I mean, I could. what I had no idea what the CRT was when I first started this. I actually had to go online, go to the website, check it out before I could do any work. Mostly because I came from Alberta and we don't have such a thing out there. And also because people commonly refer to it as an online court, and it is not an online court. But that's the easy way for people to associate with what the CRT actually stands for. So when I got on and I started researching, I realized actually how easy it is to use. And then I know the whole point was to find out, you know, if it's working for people or not. And then when I first got on, I was like, how does this not work for people? It's
Yeah.
fantastic. You don't have to go to court. You don't have to pay the lawyer. You don't have to do any of this. And if you want to collect the $300, you're not going to spend 800 chasing it. So CRT is a really handy online solution, dispute resolution, where you can come, join at your own time, make appointments as it suits you. And it certainly came in handy during the pandemic, because when all the courts shut down and law offices and there is no way to resolve anything, and you had to put your whole entire life on hold, including schooling and everything went online, CRT was still full service. And I think this is where, because we just
Nothing
started
changed,
this,
right?
nothing has
Yeah.
changed. And this is still, I remember when we were first starting and we had to recruit our participants, we were already starting to have to wear masks and all of this. Like, we're right in the midst of this.
We did most
the
of
next-
it in the summer of
Yeah.
2019, but then we were
Right
doing
before.
the interviews, like we had to
Yeah.
stop traveling for interviews in the spring. Yeah.
So it's a really neat mechanism where you can come together. And, you know, the best part of it is that the decision, which would be like the equivalent of a judgment, is enforceable just as well as any other court decision. So it's a really quick, easy way to get your problems sorted. And with all these experts these are not just random people off the streets, these are lawyers, these are adjudicators. There's someone who knows what they're talking about. So even though you cannot have legal representation, they made it so easy to actually participate in the process.
Mhm. Yeah, I'll flip through this because I think you guys kind of know a lot of this stuff. It's interesting that the CRT gets a lot of attention internationally. Like my sense is more than it does here. You know, it's sort of, like I said, there's more awareness of it here, but there are sort of observers around the world that have come here to BC to sort of like check out what we're doing and say, oh, well, maybe we should do this too. England and Wales is probably the best example because they have this big fat report, the Briggs report, and Lord Justice about like online justice and sort of updating the justice system. And Lord Justice Briggs came here and hung out with like Darren and the chair of the CRT and stuff to find out what they were doing. Richard Susskind is probably the best known sort of writer on the future of law and innovation and law. And in his most recent book, his chapters are small, so to say it's a chapter makes it sound really fancy, but it's probably about 5 pages, just talking about the CRT as an example of what he calls a court plus that's got this sort of like front end outreach to users built into it. And the continuity of service that Marina mentioned, the only thing that changed with the CRT's process when the pandemic hit was that they extended some of their deadlines because they figured people were struggling with deadlines. They didn't have to change anything else. They do remote work. So the people who work there don't really work in the office. The general counsel, Lauren Kerr, spent the whole of last summer on Hornby Island because she could. So, do you hate her? And this is the sort of court plus idea that we found really interesting, and we wanted to kind of find out, you know, what's this like for people? Like, does it help? This diagram comes from the Cromwell report on access to justice, and it's kind of recognizing the reality that most disputes don't go to adjudication in court. And one of the design ideas that the CRT is built on is that in the traditional system, we have, I guess you could say, sort of tail wagging the dog kind of a situation where we have this very small percentage of cases that actually end up getting litigated in court. And we don't really know what the percentage is because there isn't really good data on it. And it's also challenging to decide what's the denominator, right? Like, is it everything that gets filed in court, though there's a process initiated? If it is, I think there's some data indicating that the number of cases that fall out somewhere along the line is like somewhere around 90%. But again, it's pretty unsure. And then there's all the things that don't get filed in court, right? There's all sorts of disputes and legal problems that don't even get to that point. So the diagram which comes from that report is saying, you know, we have this big volume of problems at the front end and not a lot of kind of services built around trying to solve things there. And to the extent we do have them, they're kind of like add-ons to this idea that what it's all about is building up to trial, even though most of the time in reality, that's not actually the case. And so the CRT is kind of intended to be designed to emphasize this bit and to recognize the reality that very few things get to this bit, but you have this bit if you need it, but it's not sort of built on the assumption that that's kind of like the ideal where everyone is going. So it's this is why we titled it Shaking Up the Justice System. It's a pretty kind of like turning things on its head way of looking at legal disputes and legal problems. So those are the stages. I think people have sort of seen this in action, right? There's the Solution Explorer at the front end, which is free and anonymous, and anyone can use it. And you may even find yourself using it if you want to say, like, what happens if my neighbor in my condo is making too much noise or something? And then if you actually formally file a dispute, there's a secure negotiation platform where you can negotiate independently with the other party. You can create a negotiated agreement that can become an enforceable order. If that doesn't resolve things, you can go to case management, which those of you who did the exercise, you experienced what's that like. Right? So it's kind of like mediation, someone's helping you try to work it out. And then if nothing else works, you go to the tribunal. That's where it's most like a real traditional court. Except you don't have to go anywhere. Most of the adjudications are done on paper submissions. So there isn't the traditional court aspect of sort of dressing up and bowing and saying your honor and all that like stuff that terrifies people who don't have lawyers and even lawyers. Yes. It's like very hard to deal with. And one of the things the CRT does that is untraditional is they collect and report statistics. So you can't really get this kind of information about traditional courts. The provincial court, to an extent, reports some stats, but it's definitely not as comprehensive as the CRT. So they track. And one of the things about being online is that they don't really have to do a whole lot extra to track this stuff because it's automatically in the system, right? If you file a dispute, well, there's a trail of that because it's in the system. So they keep track of how many disputes are started, what kind they are, and importantly, the time to resolution, which to me is one of those things where it's like, we are in a different world here, right? Look at this in small claims in 1920, which is the last one that we've got a published report for, which I went and looked today. I thought maybe the one from 20 to 21 would be out, but it isn't, which is, I was kind of surprised by that. Yeah, so the medium time to resolution for all disputes for this period was 45 days. Do you know how long cases take in court? Not 45 days. It's different. And they also collect user satisfaction stats, which is, again, you don't see this happening in court, right? Like there is not a, like, in the airport bathrooms where they have those like frowny little smileys, you do not see that in court. You're like, how was your experience today? They don't ask you that. The CRT does ask, they ask before the adjudication happens. So the idea is don't reflect people's feeling about the result, more about their experience, which is something that was different with our survey, because by necessity, if people had gone to adjudication, it was after they had gone to adjudication. So they may have been influenced by the outcome a little, but they do this every month, and they report, this is the most recent one from September 21. So they report them regularly. And then all of these things are aggregated in the annual report too. But all of that comes from inside, right? And that's where we thought we can add something, because we're outside and we're sort of objective, even though we kind of like it, but we're in a position to sort of observe from the outside. And so we got to do the survey. And I guess like one thing I want to say, Becca's gonna tell us about some of the info we got from the survey, which is really interesting. One thing I wanted to add, because I was thinking about what it was like, the experience, and some of the funny things or scary things that happened to us. And one of them was that we asked people these questions and we got critical responses back from some of them, right? Some of them very, like, people don't enjoy going through legal processes. It's no fun. Some were very complimentary, some were like furious. And we started getting this stuff, and I think all of us had this feeling of like, ooh, what if, because like Sharon Salter, the chair of the CRT, she was like really nice to us, and like, what if she's upset that people are yelling about her nice tribunal? And the thing is, they have, any of you who have heard Shannon speak, they are very deeply committed to feedback, to responding to user experience, to continuous improvement. And that means being open to criticism. And like, no one likes it, right? No one enjoys being told you suck. But Shannon, in a weird way, does like it, because that is useful to her. So she not only welcomed this information and encouraged us, she invited us to present to the CRT, to some of the leadership and staff. And some of the things that we talked about that we had got from our users, I think have fed into initiatives. I mean, also a lot of things they were already thinking about doing anyway, but the information we had sort of supported it, like the idea of, we'll talk about this when Becca presents stuff, but navigators, they now have an indigenous navigator position. I don't know if it's just one or more than one, but they were, it was a very fun thing in terms of doing academic research to see this like connection between what we were finding out in real world and the institution we were talking about being receptive to it and taking it on board, like right away, before anything was published.
They were very responsive. It's
Yeah.
nice to see.
So Becca, do you want to talk a bit about the survey results?
I sure can.
If
So
I
we
can control the slide if you want to just tell me to move slides, or I can, yeah, that's how we'll have to do it.
So we did the survey mostly through SurveyMonkey. We had a few people who preferred to phone us over the phone, so we had that option as well. The survey was anonymous, so people could be free to tell us all of their deepest grievances without us knowing who it was on the other end. It was open for around 4 months, kind of like across the summer and into the fall. And in total, we had 49 people who answered our survey, which our goal was 50. So we were like super, super close. And then next slide, Katie. We compared the demographics of our survey respondents to the general population of BC to get a sense of where some blind spots in our data might be. In general, people who answered our survey tended to be older. A higher percentage of them were married. They were more educated than the general population of BC. And also we had a large percentage of people who had used the CRT for strata claims. Part of that is because the CRT was open to strata claims before anyone else. So there was just like more people who had used it for strata. And also the link to our survey got shared in some strata property groups around the province. So more people in that group were aware of it. So that was kind of interesting. And then next slide, Katie. So overall, we wound up with like a lot of data and a lot of written responses. we had to kind of sort through and make it into something digestible and comprehensible that told a story. And the way that we did that was kind of, we looked at the data and we could see some sort of themes, and then we would think of something else that we wanted to look at and be like, oh, it'd be interesting if we could sort of parse out these responses and compare them to these ones and see if that's a difference. And so it was an iterative process that took a lot of time, and it was really, really fun, in my opinion. And so the next few slides sort of show some of our cool findings that we found. So the first one, look, we asked about the Solution Explorer specifically, which is that first step. It's kind of like a really professional BuzzFeed quiz where it asks you questions about your situation and then can provide you some resources at the end. And so we asked how effective people found the Solution Explorer. And in general, 12 out of 49 people said it didn't help them at all. And the rest of the people who answered our survey said it did provide them some help. And considering that before the CRT existed, there was no Solution Explorer, that means that most people were in a better position than if the Solution Explorer didn't exist whatsoever. So that was really cool. Next slide, Katie. And so this is one of the things where we broke it down. We were like, oh, I want to look into this a little bit more. So what we did is we broke down the responses of people whose claim was for a strata matter and people whose claim was for a small claims matter. And we did this after we spoke to people at the CRT who said that the sort of like the internal mapping of the Solution Explorer for strata was very, very different than the one for small claims. So we wanted to see if that had made a difference in people's experiences. And this chart shows pretty clearly that it did. So in general, if you were using the Solution Explorer for something strata related, the people who answered our surveys found the Solution Explorer less helpful than people who were using it for small claims, for example. So that was sort of an area that was cool and identifiable and very actionable on the part of the CRT, because they can see very clearly that, okay, we might need to put a little bit more work into making our Solution Explorer for strata claims more helpful for people. Next slide. So this one for people who use the Solution Explorer, we asked if they had had someone else help them while they were doing it, or if they tried to use the Solution Explorer alone. And we found that people who had help going through it, whether that be from like a sibling or a friend or a community legal assistant, people who had help going through it found the Solution Explorer more useful than people who tried to use it alone. So that was another thing, another piece of feedback that we gave to the CRT, is maybe encouraging people to ask for help while they're using the Solution Explorer, whether that be from family or through a more formal channel. Next slide. And so after all of those Solution Explorer questions, then we started to ask people about their experience with the actual dispute resolution process at the CRT. So if you remember that slide that Katie showed, there's sort of the stages. The CRT first tries to do collaborative resolution, and then if that doesn't work, they go to a formal, more like a traditional court type of resolution. So in general, people who answered our survey, more people who answered our survey were satisfied with the dispute resolution process at the CRT than were unsatisfied. But there was still a pretty significant amount of people who were unsatisfied with the dispute resolution at the CRT. And the reasons for that came out in a lot of the comments that people provided us. We had like free boxes in the survey where people could just type out what they were saying, because it's more useful than just a yes or no answer. And so when we looked at people who had reached a solution at the collaborative stage, so before going to the CRT's equivalent of like a hearing, almost everyone who had reached a resolution at that stage was very satisfied or somewhat satisfied, and only one person was unsatisfied. And I think that kind of shows the power of collaborative resolution and having that ingrained in the legal system to try and come to a resolution that people feel good about. And so one of the interesting things we got to ask people is if they had had experience in the legal system before the CRT. So it's a really interesting piece of insight if you've gone through the court process before and then you've used the CRT, because you have sort of a baseline for comparing the CRT to, as opposed to like, this is my first introduction to the legal world. It's adversarial. I don't like it, but I haven't actually used what was available before. And so more people said that the CRT was better than their traditional court experience, but a significant portion said that it was worse than their traditional court experience. And that was, I think, a little bit maybe unexpected for us, and reasons for that came out in the comments. And I think we have a few of those in a few slides, but yeah. So we asked why the CRT, or was the CRT easier or harder than going to court? And people said overall the CRT was much easier than going to court, which makes sense. They didn't have to leave their house. They could do it at any time. It was way less formal and intimidating. They didn't have to find parking in downtown Vancouver. The list goes on. So this was expected, but then there was sort of a discrepancy between, okay, it was easier, but I still didn't really find it better than going to traditional court.
And the other side was everyone who had a legal problem, right? So it included people who just gave up or whatever. So
yes, that's a good clarification. Thanks, Katie.
but I still can't understand how you could think it was much harder to do like an online, file some stuff through an online portal than going to court. I would love to find those 5 people and say, what was that much harder?
Yeah. Part of me has always wondered if maybe they had a lawyer help them through the court process, and the lawyer made it really easy, and then doing it by themselves at the CRT was more difficult than having a professional handle it for them. But further research is required.
Claire had a question.
Yeah, I was just wondering if you accounted for age. So I wonder if the people who found it harder, my mom would. Right?
We have the ability to do that because we asked people their age. I don't think we ever broke that down, did we, Becca?
I think I did break it down, and we didn't find any like massive discrepancy. Like it wasn't like everyone over 65 found this much more difficult than going to court, but also we didn't have a large group of people in your mom's generation to answer our survey because it was mostly advertised online and administered online. So that's definitely a gap in our data. And I remember specifically reading one comment from someone who, like, she lived in a senior society or something, and I think she was quite older, and she expressed concerns about the online nature of it and wishing that she could just like talk to people in person. The CRT, I mean, they do have the phone option, they do have the fully in-person option, but it's primarily administered online. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
Andrew has a question too.
Thanks, Katie. This is awesome. This is great, fascinating data. I wondered, going back a couple of, can you hear me first of all?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Going back a couple of slides to, you had something about the people who had helpers. Did you notice any difference between the types of helpers, or were you able to assess that, like on the one hand, friends or family, versus on the other hand, like lay advocates or trusted intermediaries?
I don't recall. I think we asked that question. Becca, do you remember? Because I think we asked who helped. Did we ask who helped you, or did we just ask, did someone help you?
We just asked, did someone help? And then in some comments, we got an indication of who the helper was, but it wasn't something we asked specifically. But overall, my sense was that it was like a personal family member, friend, not a legal clinic or community advocate or anything like that. So, and we kind of talked about this in some of our meetings, just the presence of another person can change the way that you think about stuff and can sort of check your biases and make you think more objectively, or actually call you out on that.
You feel like you're not alone, right?
Yeah.
Because I think I think for some people it is alienating to sit and look at a screen that is giving you a bunch of information, and it's written in an accessible way, but it's still a lot of stuff coming at you, and I could see how if you were struggling with a difficult legal problem, you're just like, I just wish someone would kind of like sit me down and tell me what's going on, that would be overwhelming.
I think I remember one of the direct pieces of feedback we gave to the CRT was to have their imagery include more than one person. So even just that sort of subtle messaging of you can have people help you through this process. You don't have to do it by yourself, even though it's designed to be done without a lawyer.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of misperception out there that because, so technically the CRT has a default rule that parties in a dispute, once you file a dispute, are not represented by lawyers except for motor vehicle accident stuff. So everything that we were covering. But that is very limited. And I think people take it to mean no one's allowed to have legal help through this process. And that's not true at all. In fact, you can have a lawyer if you are in a dispute advising you every step of the way, but you can't have them represent you unless you get leave from the tribunal.
Sarah's actually having to present on that at her firm right now to convince them that they are allowed to help people through the CRT process. They just can't like show up to the hearing on behalf of the person.
Right. Yeah, and there's so much misperception about that. There's this sort of sense that like, oh, if a lawyer is anywhere near it, or like anyone is helping you anywhere near it, you can't do it. Yeah.
I was curious, kind of in response to what Mr. Major said. I worked as an advocate in the summer, and I had a lot of clients who like, well, I would either inform them about this process or they would know and come and ask me questions about it. And you know, some of them were elderly, but many of them were younger. But I think because of their socioeconomic status, they had like they had issues. Most of them like didn't have computers or Wi-Fi or phones, which obviously is a big barrier. But many of them had like a deep distrust of the legal system.
Yeah.
And even though I would try to frame this as something that, you know, is better than court, they actually saw court as like, because it's so structured, they saw that as a way of them to, it's like a protected process.
Yeah.
And they thought of this as like, oh, like if I put my information through online, like now they have all my information and like, you know, they had fears about like the government knowing information about them. Like it's a certain like type of clientele that I guess I was dealing with. And this, I kind of experienced the same thing with the residential tenancy board. But you know, I was interested to see, you know, that people said that it was a worse experience than court. And I do think that, I don't know, I have so many clients that said that if I wasn't there to do like a residential tenancy hearing for them, they just would have moved out of the house and they just wouldn't have done it at all because there's so much anxiety about that kind of thing.
Yeah,
I do think that could be a big component too. And I agree with the sense that like setting this up in a way that legal advocates can help, I think is really helpful.
They definitely can. It's just that there's sort of a perception out there that they can't. And I think there's another ingredient in what you're saying too, which we saw as a theme in the comments from people, and it's that sort of like the day in court idea, right?
Yeah.
Which there's a lot of debate in the literature and access to justice about, you know, is this something that people really want? There's a lot of traditionalists who are like, it's really important to have the day in court. And there are others who are like, that's made up by the traditional cheerleaders for the traditional legal system. It's not really something people want. I think we saw some evidence that people do have that as something that they really value in their minds. And some of our respondents regarded this process as depriving them of the chance to go to real court. And I guess like, you know, my bias is showing a little bit. When I read those, I just couldn't help thinking like, do you know what it's really like? Like it's not, it's dehumanizing, especially as a self-represented person. Yeah.
Just in that same vein, I think, so a little bit like Emily, I did LSTOT this summer. And so one of the things we would work on is just helping clients understand what their options were in the first place. And I think I had one client who had gone and done a ton of research outside of my help or my advising, which was pretty limited and pretty much echoing what she had done. But there was this issue where basically the clinic wouldn't even take on certain cases if they didn't know they could win. I'm wondering about kind of the sample, this is more of a comment than a question, but I think it's also difficult given the group of people that are trying to go through this process. It's such a wider net than most forms of court-based litigation anyway, that you're also getting a different level of people, not only having the literacy or the kind of education to know what they're going into, but even knowing what options are out there. And so it's that weird thing where I feel like there's a higher degree of scrutiny on the CRT because it's new and it's challenging all these preconceived notions, but then it also, I think, has a higher burden because it's trying to be for so many more people in so many more avenues. So it's this weird, I feel like it's like truly the tension between like old, like black letter law and like all the new and engaging and transformative things that are going on. So I feel like I see that tension in so many of these things, and it's just really cool that you guys are digging into this. It's amazing.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right, that there's that tension, like it's this sort of inflection point between the legal culture and a completely different take on how to do this dispute resolution thing. And it's, you know, it's not without friction for sure. Yeah. Shall we let you do some more of these results? I think, well, that was the last one with stats. So these are our quotes. I'll hand it over to you, Becca.
Thanks. So yeah, we just kind of pulled a few quotes that really stuck out to us as either capturing the sentiments of a lot of people or capturing like one individual's specific experience that we thought was important. So this first one is, I would not have hired a lawyer as it would have been too expensive. The amount of money I was owed was only $360. If I'd had to use a different system, I think I would not have known where to turn and just given up. The CRT system worked for me. I would use it again, but hopefully I won't ever need to. So that's one thing that the CRT, I think, does a really good job of, is small claims under $5,000, where it's just like absolutely not worth going to court because you'll spend more than that preparing for court and submitting your applications. And so someone was able to get $360 that they were owed back that they would never have been able to recover through the traditional court system. I own a business and I'm very busy during the day. I don't have time to go to a courthouse and stand around and deal with people who owe me a few $100s. Being able to do this online at any time of the day really worked for me. So the fact that it's asynchronous, meaning that someone can file a claim and then a few days later in the middle of the night, once you've put your kids to bed and your house is clean, you can respond to that instead of having to show up at a very specific time at a very specific place, is one of the main advantages to the CRT.
Yeah, show up and probably wait around for like a day.
And then get bumped to the next day and have to come back. Yeah. This is one of my favorite quotes. I was really stressed out because my roommate wouldn't give me back my damage deposit. I was so broke. Someone told me it would take more than 6 months to use the CRT, but it only took about 2. It was a hard time for me, but in the end, I got my money back. I told all my friends that if they are ever in this situation, to not give up and use the CRT. So I think there's a massive portion of people who are served by the CRT that had no place to go to otherwise. This is one of the less favorable quotes that we've pulled. It was painful. The information about the law was nowhere in ordinary language or understandable. It was being in total darkness, attempting to provide clarity with ambiguous rules and a process that constantly changed, not just or fair. So the CRT, because they're so responsive to feedback, tries to address concerns as quickly as possible. And so especially in the beginning, their process changed quite a bit. And some of these quotes come from that time period when they were really working through their process and trying to make it as streamlined as possible. And we definitely saw that reflected in our survey results.
We had like early users of the CRT because of the typing of the survey.
Yeah. I'm not complaining because I lost, but because the process failed to bring justice under the BC consumer laws, and the CRT process was flawed in that regard. It was supposed to be user-friendly without the use of lawyers, but that was not my experience. My one and only CRT experience was a nightmare. It took almost a year for the process to finish, and it did not turn out in my favor. However, I was not expecting it to, since the CRT is skewed so heavily to favor the strata and condo-related cases. So I mentioned earlier that our survey link got shared in some provincial strata, like Facebook groups essentially. And so we noticed some themes in the written responses. This is one of them, that the CRT is biased against strata owners and favors the strata corporation. And so we made sure to reflect those in our research while acknowledging that those viewpoints may have been overrepresented because we had so many people using the CRT for a strata claim in our data set.
And there is like a structural imbalance as well in that the strata corporation is a corporation, right? And they typically do have lawyers. And the law kind of favors the strata corporation because it's the collective. And so if you're one strata owner and you're trying to fight like City Hall essentially of your strata, it's an uphill battle. And so I think that is reflected in people's experiences. And the other thing that I always think is important to keep in mind with the strata, the experiences of people in strata is they really would not have anywhere to go if there wasn't a CRT, because prior to, it's actually what the CRT first had jurisdiction over, and it was kind of like the pilot project for the CRT, because it was the BC Supreme Court that had jurisdiction over strata disputes and still does over a small subset of them. And that is like completely inaccessible, right? Like small claims court, provincial court are kind of tough, but going to the BCSC to fight your strata corporation over something that might not really have any money value or very little money value, but deeply affects your life, like the sort of noise rules in your strata, or whether you can keep your dog, or whether you can like rent to your nephew or whatever, it's just not feasible. And so there was like nowhere for those disputes to go. And there needs to be somewhere for those disputes to go because these are people who live together in a small community and you can't have disputes that just fester. Blair?
I just wanted to flag a question in the chat from Andrew. Professor Pillier was another question. Sorry if I missed this. Did you gather sociodemographic and economic status information about the people you interviewed?
Yeah, we didn't interview them. It was just a survey, but this was our demographic breakdown. And there's a bit more detail in that.
We did quite a large section. The downside of this whole thing is that our participant pool was very small. We were the beginners. It's the first time anyone has done this independently. And so we did our best to try and get the flyers out, and we've printed the posters, we've printed cards, we've driven
drove around the
province. I had to go to Penticton. It was horrible. It was hot on the beach. So we have posted to coffee shops, we've posted to markets, we put it
on social media. Sarah was really in charge.
Sarah was fantastic. She was our social media.
We advertised in Coffee News.
We made the news. And I think the huge downfall is that we never made it up north. We never made it outside of, just these. I have managed to post it in Belmont, which is a smaller community on my way to Alberta. That's as far, I suppose, east as I got. And then I sent some to Smithers. My friend was kind enough to receive a package, and we're like, hey, can you help spread the word? Because we need people. We don't want just people from Kamloops and their feedback about their experience. Where we have a courthouse, we need to know about people who don't have access to courthouse and how that would affect their use. And unfortunately, we didn't get that.
Low-income people. We didn't get any indigenous people.
It's fairly skewed. It is
mostly English as first language.
Yeah.
So it's not representative of the population.
It's people who go to Starbucks.
Probably, or who are in strata Facebook groups.
Yeah.
And it may reflect something about those who use the CRT. The CRT has not, so far, I think they may be just beginning, but they have not been collecting demographic data, so partly for like privacy reasons and so on. So we don't have a basis to compare. But one thing that is interesting to know, and that who responded to our survey sort of throws up the question is this really reaching sort of the most disadvantaged? It does seem like it's getting to some people who are not the most downtrodden in society, but realistically aren't going to be in a position to go to the BC Supreme Court and do a strata dispute, because like for ordinary people, it's that sort of cliche, like lawyers can't afford lawyers, like regular people, even who are relatively well off, can't afford the legal system. But the most sort of marginalized just like Emily was saying, you know, maybe this is not reaching them. Yeah.
I was curious, is there an element of people that didn't necessarily get what they wanted from the CRT, primarily being the ones that are also complaining about it?
Probably.
I did sort for that, Katie. So we had asked if they were successful in their dispute, and I didn't find any like strong indication that the negative comments we were getting were from people who had lost their dispute or anything like that. And so
some of those strata ones, it's probably that, right? Right?
It was statistically significant.
So, no.
No, but none of it is because it's only 49 people.
Right.
Yeah. And also what we found in the written comments is that people wanted to get it out. People, when you file your documents, you don't get to tell them, you know, oh, I had a worst experience with this guy, like, because they don't care about your emotions. They want to see what are you looking for. But this is the same in your legal practice in court.
And you get cross-examined, and I just don't think people realize that.
Yeah, so this is the thing where people sometimes just want to be heard.
Yeah.
They just want to get it out. They
Yeah.
want to let it out. They want to show you how they feel about this, how badly it's affecting their lives. And they don't necessarily get that opportunity. But I feel like they might be mistaken in thinking they'll get it in court. Because court also doesn't like, they don't care about your emotions. They want to know what you've lost and how you can get it back, how you've been
And are you telling the truth?
wrong. Are you telling the truth?
Yes.
And nothing but the truth.
And what is the other guy's perspective on it? Because it may be
Exactly.
very
So
different.
and I feel like this is maybe people were expecting, and I'm speculating that, you know, they're going to be heard in court, that they're going to tell their side of the story. But I feel like that's also, you know, that's not feasible. That's not how
It
court
sounds more
works.
like court in the movies than court.
Objection. Yeah.
You like tell your story
American-
and everyone
American
cries.
TV shows. But yeah, no, we did, there was not a significant correlation, but again, small sample, everything was really on
But I'm
a
good
small
to see that you guys actually looked at that.
Yeah, so SurveyMonkey actually has a really neat, and I do recommend this because I was the one who handled most of SurveyMonkey. It's really user friendly. So if you ever have to do any, you know, any research or
really
any
good for
questions,
this.
it's fantastic because it does cross-reference. So you can actually find out, you know, you take this
You
piece
can
of data,
filter.
you can, exactly. So
You could
can-
go to a question like the age one and you can say, I
Yeah.
want to know what all the people who were like over 50 said to these
about,
questions.
exactly. So it was really great. We did a lot of that. At one point, it was just fun to find out. It's like, hey, you know, like what do people over 50 think about, you know, one thing or another. And so it was really, really easy thing to use. It was a fantastic tool. And I think that it really did, although we couldn't get, you know, a bigger sample, we were shooting for 50, got to 49. That was we got about 350 at first.
Oh, yeah,
Because
you should tell that
so I should
story.
tell you a story because we're talking about the process of our research here. When we initially started, we needed to put in something, or we thought we needed to kind of give a little incentive for people to do the survey. Why would they spend 25 minutes of their life for us? So what we did was we came up with this huge scheme of how we're going to buy little gift cards and we're going to send them up.
Like
we're
electronic
gonna
gift
do
cards,
electronic
because
gift
we wanted
cards.
it to be anonymous, we didn't want to know who people were.
So we did all that first without thinking that people would, you know, take advantage of that. So we.
Yeah, who would have thought? It was like $10.
Oh my
or
gosh, it
$5
was
or something.
$5 cards that we said, you know, like at the end of your survey, you get this $5
Like a coffee card.
whatever. Well, then we had 450 surveys
In like
in 20 minutes.
It was
Bots.
just crazy.
We got bombarded with bots, so we had to cut that out.
There's people somewhere in a Romanian
Yeah,
bot farm
they
who
figured-
were like crawling the internet for anything, right? Because it was a public link and
Yeah,
just
So-
machines like descended on it and
there was a lot of trial and error
Yeah.
to actually
didn't know what we
begin
were
this.
doing.
We did not know. So in the end,
But we lived and learned.
nice
And we
people
could tell
couldn't
that
get
they were
anything
fake because they were, you could see like where they came from,
Yeah.
that they were really, really quick. If you could look at
Yeah.
the data, it's like this was in the survey.
Like a
for
minute and a half to
And then
complete
the
the whole
answers
thing.
were completely random, or they were just like all C or whatever.
But then we said booby traps, so then we had questions who, you know, we had to get past
It
that
was like
because we
a
needed
picture of a
real
cat, and like,
people.
what is this?
So it's like, is this a hamster? And it's like, so we had to actually like set these traps so that we would get real life participants. So in the end, we're fairly confident that 49 people were actual people and
And we
not
took out
robots.
the
It's like-
incentive.
We took out the incentive because you could, you know, like nice people couldn't get anything because not everybody played nice.
It turns out you can do an open link survey that's anonymous, or you can do a survey with a reward, but you can't do both.
Can't do both,
Because
yeah.
you get both.
Right, go
I'm
ahead.
just gonna ask, so I'm partly saying this because my admin prop is in the room, but how many of the cases were people aware of the option of judicial review if they were?
Oh, Becca, do you want to talk about this?
I'll come or just. How do
This is
people perceive of
your
kind
area.
of finishing up?
Okay.
Oh,
This is the, this is the like nerdiest thing I've ever researched in my life. And I took admin law during the pass fail semester, so you know, I had to make up for it. So I did a directed research paper for Katie that spun out of this project. And so basically, for small claims at the CRT, there's a very, very weird mechanism where you go through the entire CRT process, you get your decision, and then the parties have the option to file a notice of objection. And when they file a notice of objection, it completely nullifies the CRT decision, and you have the right to a de novo, like from the start, fresh evidence and everything trial at the BC Provincial Court.
That's a reason for notice of objection.
Like you just say, I don't like the decision, period.
I object to it, that's it.
Yeah.
Only restriction is if you defaulted, you can't do it. So if you.
And
go up
that
and-
restriction was new and not in place at the beginning.
So you don't show up and then be like, I object and start over.
Yeah. So we found out about this because I interviewed, as another part of the project, I interviewed Ted, who runs the legal clinic at TRU, and he was going on and on about this notice of objection. And we were like, what on earth is this guy talking about? So we looked into it.
Like, this can't be right.
It was right. We looked into it. And so I did a research project where I looked at every single CRT small claims decision for 2 years and followed them through to see how many of them had been objected to. And the ones that were objected to, how many of them actually restarted the process in BC Provincial Court and got a decision. And I think there was like 350 small claims decisions from the CRT. Maybe 20 of them actually went through, or 350 small claims decisions that were objected to. 20 of them actually went all the way through the provincial court process, and 0 of them wound up with a decision that was different than the original CRT decision.
Pretty fascinating.
But in direct answer to your question, not many people, we didn't hear anything about this possibility for judicial review. Maybe we heard about it once or twice from strata claim people in our survey results, but it wasn't something that was brought up consistently. There was one person who was like in the midst of going through judicial review, but because the CRT's one of the CRT's main draw is like timeliness and affordability, the judicial review process is the exact opposite of that. And so it's not an avenue that's pursued commonly or by rational people.
It speaks to, again, like the legal sophistication to know that that's an option to then go
Yeah.
through it, even if you're not doing it for quote unquote rational purposes. Like it has to fit into all these other sets of courts and exist and play well, or at least somewhat nicely with some of those other systems. So it's really interesting.
Yeah, and there are judicial reviews of CRT decisions.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to think, I actually don't recall, but I'm just knowing the way the CRT is designed, I'm pretty sure they give you some information about that. Like they give you information about how to enforce your judgment. I think they probably give you some information about, you know, what to do if you don't like it.
Yeah, they do, they
yeah.
send you a package.
but it's, yeah, judicial review is not for the faint of heart, right? Yeah.
Just a question for Rebecca. Is there a scenario in which somebody doesn't like the decision and they reject the decision and then it doesn't get litigated further and then that decision also doesn't stand?
Yep. many times. So I wrote a paper and made a recommendation. It's published in the upcoming UBC law review volume that's not out yet, but will be soon. And my recommendation was to just remove that process altogether because it doesn't make sense, and bring it in line with the actual regular judicial review process where you have to apply and state why you want judicial review, so that people don't waste 6 months at the CRT and wind up in the same position that they were in before the CRT.
And we were talking before about this being an almost a point of clashing between an innovative approach to dispute resolution and the traditional legal system. And I think if you switch lenses and look at this problem from the perspective of the legitimate jurisdiction of an administrative tribunal, where it's small claims, it's like everything, right? It's kind of court, but it's not court. And how do you ensure that that is kind of constitutionally solid and fits into our legal order, and not, how can I put this diplomatically, not viewed with more hostility than it needs to be by the judiciary, then it might look different whether you would want that process to be there or not. But from the point of view of people using the system, it does not seem to make a whole lot of sense. Anyway, shall we finish up I think we've got like 2 or 3 more of these. This is interesting. That kind of fits with that theme of like, I want the traditional system. I want the thing that I think the dispute resolution or court is supposed to be. Oh, that was our last one. Cool. So all of this, if you want more, is in the article that we wrote on sort of writing up the user experience survey data. It was submitted to Windsor Yearbook of Access to Justice about 300 years ago, right? And it's like, it's done, and it's been done for ages, but the last that I heard from the editors was they just kind of wait until they've got all of their pieces for the next issue and then they publish it. So who knows? It's been like, it's almost a year.
Yeah,
it's been a while.
It should be coming out soon, hopefully.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, we're
I
excited
hope by
about
the
that.
end of 2021. But you can see the complete thing in the form that it will be in when it's published, because all the editing and stuff is done. And it's at that link on SSRN. So there's lots more little tidbits of information out there.
You guys use the word court in the title. Is that a specific choice or just sort of more?
Most people think of it as an online court, and it just seemed to describe the thing that people have in mind, right? When people think of the CRT. So we do have, a very law nerdy bit in there, but it's not really a court, it's an administrative tribunal, and here's how they're different. But it's just sort of colloquially known as, people don't go around saying, I'm gonna go on the online administrative tribunal to see you, right?
Yeah, ODR, and I think it's the same wording in all of the other, like international
yeah, like if you look at
papers and everything else, it's always as online court. I think it just became like a synonym, which
people who study like online dispute resolution in public legal systems, that's why I think using the word court sort of does convey something about what it is, because it's part of the public legal system. It's not an optional process. It's not mediation. It's not ODR as online dispute resolution, as it is usually used to refer to things like e-based dispute resolution system, right? So since we did that, there's been a lot going on with the CRT. None of it is sort of affects the things that we looked at in our user survey, because these all happened like since those people used it. But the biggest thing is that the province changed the legislation on the regime for motor vehicle accidents and switched it away from a tort system to a care-based, or it's really no fault, but they don't like saying that, whatever, it's care-based model, where what determines what you get from ICBC is how badly injured you are and not whose fault it was. And so the CRT now has, and that policy change has nothing to do with the CRT directly, it's just a policy change about, like, it could be courts that deal with it still, but alongside that policy change, because I think the Ministry of the Attorney General, you know, kind of likes this way of dealing with disputes because it's efficient and quick and it deals with a large volume of disputes fast. And that's a particularly pressing need now with the backlog from COVID. So they gave the CRT jurisdiction over adjudicating the disputes with ICBC. And that, like, the legal kind of culture had some things to say about the CRT in the early days, particularly the default rule of not being represented. But I don't think they cared that much because, like, lawyers aren't doing small claims cases. And a very tiny subset of lawyers specialize in strata law, but they still have a role in this. They can assist people, they can advise strata corporations. And we interviewed a few strata lawyers and I think they found it, like, pretty interesting because there was this avenue to get things sorted out, which I think they found valuable. Motor vehicle accident damages is a very large part of the sort of economic ecosystem for trial lawyers, and they don't like it. They don't like the care-based model, and they don't like the CRT being where you go if you have a fight with ICBC. And they have raised, I think, some concerns that, you know, at the end of the day, I don't agree with, but I think they're serious concerns and they require thinking about, and they, being trial lawyers, are making sure that they get, you know, a good hearing on things like the independence of the CRT. Like, it's independent in the sense that, you know, the tribunal members are they're not appointed by, like, elected officials. They're not, like, part of ICBC or anything, but they don't have lifetime tenure. They're not, and they don't have, I guess, that the same degree of perceived legitimacy that judges do. And then there is also this issue about encroaching on the constitutional jurisdiction of Section 96 courts. This is pretty complicated. I won't get into it too much, mostly because I read the case like months ago and I've forgotten most of it. But the bottom line is they won at first instance. Chief Justice Hinkson wrote this very long decision about a specific aspect of the CRT's jurisdiction over motor vehicle personal injury. It's not actually about the accident benefits stuff. It was from before that. It was from when we still had the tort-based system. And the upshot of it is that that particular piece of the relevant statute is unconstitutional. But the effect of part of the ruling has been stayed while it's on appeal. So if you go on the CRT Solution Explorer or just on the website and look at stuff about motor vehicle, there's this subset of cases where they're giving you information and they're like, you know, should I go? You now have the choice to go to court or to the CRT because of the effect of this ruling. And they've got this sort of FAQs and it's like, what should I do? Should I go to the court? And they're like, we don't know. Like, we can't tell you because it's a little bit of a moving situation. And it is, again, I think, an example of the fact that there's a real tension here between the traditional legal system and this kind of disruptive way of doing things. It's quite, if you ever slog your whole way through the decision from the BC Supreme Court, it's kind of striking that there's a lot of discussion in this kind of legal history kind of way about what Section 96 of the Constitution meant in 1867 and whether the fact that there were, like, tort cases about horse-drawn carriages means that the CRT can adjudicate motor vehicles disputes, and it's weird. Right? It's just one of those times when a traditional and precedent-based system is kind of smacking into the modern world, and it's weird. All right, so I want to let Ali have a quick turn to talk about some research she's been doing, and that's what we'll finish up with.
Hi, everyone. So yeah, I kind of did a bunch of like a hodgepodge of research, I would say, on different things that Katie was interested in. And one of those was, so Candace, the other student that was part of the team, put together kind of like an ODR jurisdiction table of like who else in the world was using systems similar to the CRT to resolve disputes. And then COVID happened. And so obviously that area totally blew up because everywhere in the world was having to at least incorporate some kind of online aspect because they were shutting their doors and couldn't operate as they normally would. So that was one of the things I looked into, and a lot of it was kind of basic in the way that courts were just moving their existing systems online and not really innovating much. And I think that was kind of a nature of just because it was a time pressured situation. Like we have a really already backlogged system, and then you're adding the COVID delays. And so they just need to get things online as fast as possible. So that was the majority of what the jurisdictions were doing, but some were using the opportunity to have pilot projects. Like in Alberta, when they brought in their online court system, they also brought in an online, it was an optional mediation system that's similar to the negotiation stage of the CRT, where parties could have like online mediation and then try and resolve the dispute before going to court. So there was some of those types of developments. One that I really loved that has nothing really to do with technology, but just showed creativity during the pandemic was in, I think it was Ireland. They wanted to have jury trials and they just like couldn't socially distance juries in courts. And so they rented out movie theaters, which weren't being used during the pandemic. And they'd socially distance the jury in the movie theater and they'd play the court proceedings on the screen for them. So that was a fun thing to come across. And then the other kind of great, like it sounds bad to say great thing about the pandemic, but one silver lining of the pandemic was now there was a ton of data on online proceedings, which is really helpful for CRT research. So one of the other things I looked into was what types of disputes are suitable for online resolution and what is not, because the CRT is in like a real growth stage. As we've seen, they've just added like motor vehicle to their jurisdiction. And I'm sure that the government is going to want to put anything in their court that they can deal with because it's more efficient and it's more cost effective. So going through what literature was available since the pandemic suggested that the obvious is that high volume, low value disputes are really suited to online resolutions. Sorry, I'm getting a ton of messages. And so that's the beeping that you're hearing in the background. But the kind of more interesting things I found were the types of people that online dispute resolution could benefit. And so those types of people were either like vulnerable. So they're like a victim of violence, or they didn't feel safe being in the courtroom with the person that who was the other party. And then also neurodiverse participants in the legal system have a way easier time communicating online than they do in person, because there's just like sensory overload and it's really hard for them to read body language. And so if you're communicating via text or just like online and there's less to take in, they found these systems really helpful during the pandemic. And kind of the biggest pitfall of online proceedings was this intangible human element that was missing. So a lot of people talk about this, and a lot of it, I think, is people just saying that there's something missing. And then there are some studies that actually showed through data that things like bail hearings and sentencing hearings, like you'd have statistically worse outcomes if they're held online instead of in person. And there's lots of suggestions as to why. And one of them is that the decision maker can't feel empathy as effectively as they could in person. And so it changes their decision. And what else should I tell you? Yeah, that's kind of like a real fast overview of some of the things I looked at. And then another thing was like just the general impression of CRT in the literature. And so I found kind of the same thing as Katie mentioned earlier, is that like globally, the CRT is like super popular and well thought of. And then kind of a lot of the critique came locally, more recently, especially with motor vehicle lawyers. So I found that another interesting thing is that like around the world, people are like, wow, the CRT is amazing. And in BC, like most of my friends like didn't know it existed. And a lot of lawyers I talk to don't know it exists. So yeah. Yeah. But yeah, that was like a really fast overview of some things, but
we should probably wind up because it's just about
Yeah.
2:20. That was terrific, Ali, thank you. And the other disadvantage of online hearings is this, of course. I just wanted an excuse for that. And yeah, more stuff, questions, we already did. That's the end. Thank you, everybody. I
Thank
think
you.
I was going to say some final words, but thanks so much for the really interactive discussion. Really enjoyed that.
Oh, thank you so much. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you, everybody, for coming online and presenting. Thanks for coming back to visit us and share your
And
really
thanks to
amazing
the
experiences.
online research people.
And
as
Candace
well,
and
you
Sarah,
brought-
who couldn't join us today.
Yeah, they contributed a huge amount to this.
So the only thing I did want to say is I just wanted to flag for you that we will have a third event in the fall term. Professor Tesh Dagnan is going to be talking about some of his research around big data and protecting the authors of that data. And that will be November 16th. So just keep your eyes open for that. There's more to come. So thank you again, everybody, for all the work you've done and for sharing with us. Thank you for coming.
Pleasure, thanks for coming. Bye, thank you guys.
Here, class. I'm gonna grab a copy.
I have to do class.
You have class? Okay, well, I'll see you.
Yes.